Thanks everybody for coming, and thanks you guys for hosting this great event and having me be included. I appreciate it. Am I close enough to the microphone? Everyone okay? Yeah. Okay. So I did do Henry James, and I think the Susan Howe might have been a little misleading. I realized I didn't look at actual manuscripts of Henry James, which is what Howe does with Dickinson and my Emily Dickinson. But it's a textual sort of interchange. If folks haven't read Henry James, he's an American author. His brother was William James, who's well known for psychology and semi-philosophy sort of texts. Sort of predates phenomenology in a lot of ways, and also American pragmatism. And his brother pops up in here. The story I focused on, he wrote really thick books, novels with lots of sentences in them. So I just focused on like a story, a short story, but his short stories are rather long. They're almost like the size of a novella. So the one I did was The Beast in the Jungle, which is about 60 pages or something. You could just call it that. The characters are a man named Marcher and a woman named Bartram. And the story is basically about their relationship. It's not romantic per se. There's no sex. Probably everyone that's read Henry James knows that there's no sex in Henry James books. And that's sort of part of what this is sort of taking a task on. Because the whole story, they just kind of like flirt around each other and nothing ever happens except for what could have happened is one way to understand the story, among multiple ways you could understand it. And the other thing you might want to know is there's a cousin Minnie, and that's an actual cousin of the James brothers. So this will kind of move between imagined correspondence between Henry and William James, of which there's a recent book that Iowa put out, which I haven't read. So these are imagined letters. And then there's also sort of a commentary, which is sort of academic, different sort of voice. And then there's some just poetic passages, which are like poems, and then there's poetic passages, which again are commentary. So that's about it. I'm just going to read this, and that'll be it. And this was a call for work that Jessa Crispin put out for her mag Spolia. I think I said it right. It's hard to say it right, these things. And then she also does Bookslut. I write a lot of reviews for Bookslut. And so her call for work just generated this. And it's not up yet. I think the James issue might go up sometime this summer or in the fall. The title is The Theme of Too Late. And it was a call for covers, so you could call this a cover, but it's more of like a commentary interpretation cover. And it'll move between sections, and I'll try to use an inflection in my voice to indicate those changes. Dear Henry, what is, maybe even when it is not, I do trust you understand. Meaning, you see, has never been clearer than between two such brothers as you and I. To believe is to believe. We must or mustn't, as comes to be our nature, so revealed. This third way we've entered in upon, troubles to no end. As you well know, affectionately yours, William James. To desire, lay out a tale as a recorded conceit and an accomplished fact. Marcher is perhaps the most conspicuous of James' characters who commit the Hawthornian unpardonable sin of exploiting another human for their selfish ends. There is no going back. His one desire is to meet his fate, to learn it in a word. It obviously requires some digging out. That he misses it, never, even when it stares directly at him, ceases grasp the opportunity of doing so, is the story. It was a party, or at the very least a gathering, let us say, at which he whiled away hours with small chit-chat, the sort of nothings into which the conversation roams when participants are aware of one another's interests in a generally vague enough way that nothing startles. He found himself drawn into discussing, what it was he was personally looking forward to. She appeared from out a corner with such a query, as though she had hung back, all the while taking him into account. Her figure was arresting yet slight. Neither the fact she was there nor the intensity at which John Marcher became at once pierced by and joined to Mae Bartram concerned him in the least. He merely accepted, as was his custom by that point in his existence, that this curve too would strain itself. The coming revelation intrigued him to no end. Marcher is haunted by ghosts, tinged by elements Poe expertly toys with, and the regrettably tragic memory of cousin Minnie Temple, how dear William secularizes everything. In essence, to live towards being something is a preoccupation with life itself, a distraction, distancing the self from what is, or maybe love, from knowing what is love. The pursuit is all. That word I know you hate. As if swept irresistibly towards some foreordained experience or end, Marcher continually rushes past Bartram's sincere intention. To not ever have felt or vibrated less than another, yet a need to know he has vibrated more than any imaginable. He is overwhelmed by some simple reminder of beauty, that little tragedy Bartram becomes, as is his very eyes refuse until too late they see. Is it even living? It'll do. Never been able to face being alone. Marcher's faith, his sick soul's overpowering supposition that human endeavor counts for little in a world where all events are fixed. Imagine all the aggravations and disasters envisioned by Bartram's unannounced intent. How her peril resulted in, from, the very menace he brought upon himself, that personal privation beyond which his insistence never wavers. Bartram lives for the worldly and human love she bears for him, apparently suffering the greater in measure to his lack thereof. You know and you're afraid to tell me. It's so bad that you're afraid I'll find out. Her silence, as Marcher hears it to be, straps each of them onto grinding gears of fate until a new hearing possibly breaks Marcher's ridiculous suppositions. Building a relationship round comfort of being present only in regard to a future which always remains as if, or yet to be, open only to the impossible possibility of an event eternally put off. Not, I'd rather not. Rather, I will, I continue to, I ever shall expect to. Prototypical North American Puritan bullshit. They say this and that. We did nothing of the kind. Of course, always mistaken these pseudo-delusional future minds. We must be more, my dear Henry. Affectionately yours, William James. Minnie's letters, Bartram's dying, Poe's necrophilia, some kinds of love he figured as the beast in the jungle. That was what had been in the lap of the gods, this nervous and resourceful wizard who turned life, female life, into art. This end put off, to have created the idea of preparedness as the only worthwhile moment, living moment, drafting the particular, claiming the universal. That pattern generally for suffering and selfless female love, which James chooses serve, to see the world vulgar and vain, a reflection of brotherly understanding, little tragedy of the man who has removed himself by renouncing false ambition. Marcher finds the dream of his youth, his genius, talent, vocation, to lie in the arms of a dead woman. These are James's words. He barters it, exchanges it for something different, inferior, yet nonetheless mercenary and worldly, namely his own identity exchanged for Bartram's spirit, a ghost story fashioned from off the James brothers' family secrets. Only in the realm of art could her permanence be secured, her spirit immortalized. She, meanwhile, all the time, sees his life as it is. This is fantasy James reveals only to his notebook. He continues, what she has said to him has, in a way, by its truth, created the need for her, made him want her, positively want her more. Minnie, after all, would have been yet another of her own victims, plaything to feminine whim. The dreams and satisfactions which Bartram throws over her vision of Marcher, with which he, in turn, is enthralled. In short, James writes himself and William out of any possible fault over Minnie, at the expense of Minnie's memory. As if anything had occurred, these stories arise from out that life. A fear that he was incapable of love. Fred Moden, who's just a poet, not just, but he teaches down at Riverside. He's a great poet, current poet. And he gave a lecture. So this is like a, sort of like just like a coda. Fred Moden says Montaigne carved his favorite quotes into the wooden ceiling beams of his last secluded writing alcove. These visual catacombs I can't resist but envision as shelved lines of lives lived, which are resurrected thereby. A set of shelved lives that at once stands as evidence of books for books' sake. A waddling connection drawn between what is written and the everyday confrontations with which every life meets. Despite his own ineptness at bearing responsibility, James repeatedly reminds us to be aware of whose toes upon which we step as we go, to ask ourselves, what are we doing and why are we doing it? That's a paraphrase of David Meltzer and Philip Whalen conversation. It is not enough. No art will match up against a variously lived life. Too little, too late, too soon, desire awaits every handed fate. Thanks.
Yeah.